All right, everybody got a Bible or access to a Bible? We're going to be flipping through pages a little bit today. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Alrighty. So, I have a quiz for you. Who was the first king of England? It's a bit of a trick question because different historians will debate about it. But you guys are all part of the Commonwealth, so this should be an easy one.
What did you say, Dave?
King Richard the Lionheart. No. I've got his picture up there if you need help.
There's no name.
No, there's not a name. Well, this child was named by his mother, Egbert.
Egbert?
Yeah,
Is that a short name?
that's the first king of England. Now do you recognize him?
Yeah, I know him,
Oh, God.
but I forgot. Oh, you're old.
Red has a birthday in a week, so we won't tell him how old he is.
I got it picture.
Egbert, apparently, at some point, the British Isle was divided into 3 different kingdoms, and he united them through conquering, and began the 200-year dynasty. And he began the kings of England. Good job, Egbert. We salute you. Okay, so who was the first king of Israel? Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. 1 Samuel 8:4. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and went to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, "Look, you are old, and your sons do not follow your example. Therefore, appoint a king to judge us the same as all the other nations have." And when they said, "Give us a king to judge us," Samuel considered their demand sinful, so he prayed to the Lord, but the Lord told him, "Listen to the people and everything they say to you. They have not rejected you, they have rejected me as their king." So who was the first king of Israel?
Saul.
God.
Yahweh. God.
No, sure.
It's kind of fun to, anyway, sorry. It's only fun on this end. Okay.
Since that's the only
That
one
was
that's
fun.
laughing.
Okay. Okay. And that's a picture of Samuel. It just, I don't know, it's part of the story. So today we need to talk about Jesus the King. And we're talking under this broader heading of, when we learn about Jesus, we learn about ourselves because we are hidden in Christ. And when Christ is revealed, who is our life, we will be revealed with him in glory. Secondly, Colossians 1 said we'll become perfect in the image of Jesus. So Colossians 3 says we're being reformed in the image of our Creator. So this is kind of under the broad heading that we're kind of passing some learning through. And so what we're going to do today is talk about Jesus the King. So it's kind of fun to think about, when we learned about Jesus the prophet, the original goal that God had was not to have prophets. He didn't really want to have intermediary, in-betweeny people to communicate. He started out on the mountain, talking to the people. The people said, "Crazy, scary, please don't do that." And so God appointed Moses as the first prophet. And then from then on, he used prophets to declare. And so the king was the same way. God was never really it wasn't really in the plan for there to be kings in Israel. Interesting, huh? Because they're really famous. Give us some famous Israel kings from your Old Testament readings. Yep, we'll talk about David this morning. Any other names? They're all weird sounding. We can't go on until we get one more weird name. That's all. Okay, that's not a bad one. Okay, yeah, Solomon the wisest, the richest, historically accurately provable. And so let's talk about kings a little bit. Let's just kind of get into this a little. So what made a good king? I do want you to go, well, I'll read Deuteronomy 17. We're going to do a lot of reading otherwise. Deuteronomy 17 was actually before the whole Samuel, they rejected me as king thing. So Deuteronomy is Moses talking. So he's giving everybody last instructions before they enter the land and conquer it, and God will be their king. So in Deuteronomy 17 he says, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, take possession of it, live in it, and say, I will set a king over me like all the nations around me. You are to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. Appoint a king from your brothers. You're not to set a foreigner over you, or one who is not of your people. So there's instructions that Moses gives for when, this is interesting, when they break down and want a king like all the other nations around them. See that again? The third line down. I will set a king over me like all the nations around me. Moses predicted that the people thereafter, centuries later, 3 centuries, would become discontent with God as their king and want a king like all the other nations around them. So he predicts that. So he starts actually giving them instructions before they need him. And he says, got a couple things like choose someone from your family. And he says this, when he is seated on his royal throne, he is to write a copy of this instruction, which is the book of the law, for himself on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priest. It is to remain with him, and he is to read from it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to observe all the words of this instruction, and to do these statutes. And then his heart will not be exalted above his countrymen. He will not turn from this command to the right or left, and his sons will continue ruling many years over Israel. So he's giving instructions on how to be a good king. So whoever this king is going to be, whenever the people become discontent with Yahweh their God, he offers the instruction, get a copy of the law, read it all the days of your life, so that you can learn to fear the Lord your God and observe the words of this instruction and do these statutes, and then your heart will not be exalted over your countrymen, and you will not turn right or left from the command. So if we were to go look at 1 Samuel 8, we've got other goals today, so we're not going to study 1 Samuel 8, but in the back of your head, if you were to read 1 Samuel 8, what you'll see is God actually looks at the people and says, you're not going to like a king. They're going to take your best kids, they're going to take the best land, they're going to take extra taxes, they're going to require extra servants, and you don't have any of that problem right now when I'm your king. Secondly, he points out to them, you're free. Do you trust me enough to keep your borders contained, to organize you, to be your central person? And the people said, no, because the people around us, they have someone that they can like worship almost, like, we're proud of our king, we love our king. Like, well, that's me, that's God. Okay, so you start to see kind of where the kingship thing came from. And then you see, okay, well, if you're going to be a king, if there's going to have to be an earthly king, then make sure that he gets the book of the law, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, in his life every day, so that he doesn't depart from what's written here, so that he doesn't lift his heart up over the people and become an oppressor, so that he continues to keep the people's freedom, continues to keep the people worshiping Yahweh, underneath Yahweh, with Yahweh, so that he himself can fear the Lord his God. And that would be a good king. That'd be a good person anyway, right? But that'd be a good king. So let's do a quick review. How did the kings do? And I want you to turn to 1 Kings 15. 1 Kings 15. It's, I don't know, there in the Old Testament. And in 1 Kings 15, I got it up here too, but I want you to see some other things on top of it. I'd like you to be able to see in your Bibles what's going on. 1 Kings 15:3. In the middle of, the reason the book of Kings is called Kings is because it's the record of all the kings. So we're just going to kind of look at what some of the success rate of the kings were. So Abijam walked in all, verse 3, walked in all the sins of his father committed before him. And he was not completely devoted to the Lord his God as his ancestor David had been. But because of David, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem to raise up his son after, to establish Jerusalem. For David did what was right in the Lord's eyes, and he did not turn aside from anything that God had commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. So that's David's story there. So let's just talk about this. So Abijam was another king. And he was like the second king of Israel. Long story short, things split. He was the second king of the split. And he was not completely devoted to the Lord. And who is he compared to as a good king? David. David was the ideal good king. So we are going to look at what David had done. But we see here that all the kings then started to be compared to David. And what was so great about David? That second bold portion. David did what was right in the Lord's eyes. He did not turn aside from anything that God had commanded him. So David was a good king. He was doing what that Deuteronomy passage we just looked at was saying. He'll lay up the book of the law. He'll learn to fear the Lord. He won't depart right or left. And that first bold portion, what was wrong with Abijam? What was his problem? First bold portion, he was not completely devoted. He was not completely devoted. Okay? We're going to look at that word a lot. If you look down at verse 11, Asa is another king. Okay? So Asa did what was right in the Lord's eyes, as his ancestor David had done, so he's still compared to David. And he banished all the male cult prostitutes from the land, awkward, and removed all the idols that his father had made. He also removed his grandmother Maacah from being queen mother because she had made an obscene image of Asherah. Asa chopped down her obscene image and burned it in the Kidron Valley. The high places were not taken away, but Asa's heart was completely devoted to the Lord his entire life. So was Asa a good king? And what made him a good king? He bold portion. His heart was completely devoted to the Lord his entire life. He did what was right in the Lord's eyes, and he did not compromise with other idols. Okay? In fact, he made steps to remove other idols. Sometime I'll explain to you what an Asherah and a Baal are, but they're not fun or pretty. Okay? So there we have we got that other guy, Abijam, not good king, wasn't like David. Asa, good king, like David, completely devoted. And then you'll notice too, in that top bold portion, this is Abijam, he was not completely devoted. Now let's look at the bottom bold portion. He was completely devoted. So this then becomes the phrase that gets used to assess kings after they lived their whole life. The Bible sums up their life as either completely devoted or not completely devoted. All of history and all of eternity will remember Asa because he was completely devoted. All of history and all of eternity and all of heaven knows Abijam because he was not completely devoted. Does this freak anyone else out? Okay. Let's just look at a little bit more comparison here because I want to show you the houses. So along come 1525, so if you want to look at 1525, Nadab, son of Jeroboam, became king of Israel, and he reigned over Israel 2 years. And bold portion, Nadab did what was evil in the Lord's sight and followed the example of his father and the sin he had caused Israel to commit. And then the next one, verse 33. So if you want to go to verse 33, I got it up there too. In the 3rd year of Judah's king Asa, Baasha, son of Ahijah, became king over all Israel and reigned in Tirzah 24 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight and followed the example of Jeroboam and the sin he had caused Israel to commit. So what am I going to show out of this? Followed the example, followed the example. So as people started being not completely devoted to the Lord, their children started following that example. So king number 1, not completely devoted to the Lord. His son followed the example and was not completely devoted to the Lord. So that just speaks on its own. Okay, so let's look at Ahazes. 1 Kings 11:4. Who was the father of Solomon? David. So David was cool. David was very cool. So in 1 Kings 11:4, here we have a summary of Solomon's life. When Solomon was old, his wives seduced him to follow other gods. He was not completely devoted to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of Sidonians, and Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight, and unlike his father David, he did not completely follow Yahweh. And the funny thing about Solomon is he started out awesome. He started out great. He got to build one of the wonders of the ancient world, the temple in Jerusalem. And yet, he did not finish well. He did not finish being completely devoted to Yahweh, his God. And so he is remembered as the one who was not completely devoted to the Lord his God, as his father David was. Okay? So starting good is good. Finishing good is also good. Okay? So let's talk about David then. Since he's such a comparison, do turn then to Psalm 27 with me. Psalm 27. It's right in the middle of everything. And Psalm 27 was written by David. And he's got quite the emotion, this guy. Very emotional fellow. And I'm just going to read this fairly briefly, but I just hear this guy. See why maybe God liked him so much. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evildoers came upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumbled and fell. Though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war rise against me, in spite of this, I shall be confident. One thing I have asked from the Lord, that I shall seek. I desire that I may dwell in the house of Yahweh all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to meditate in his temple. For in the day of trouble he will conceal me in his tabernacle. In the secret place of his tent he will hide me. He will lift me up on a rock. And now my head will be lifted up above my enemies around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, and be gracious to me and answer me. When you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, O Lord, I shall seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not abandon me or forsaken me, O God, my salvation. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me up. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my foes. Do not deliver me over to the desire of my adversaries. For false witnesses have risen against me, such as breathe out violence. I would have despaired unless I believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong, and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. So that's just beautiful, right? That's just beautiful. So here we got a guy. Where did he want to spend his time? Got a picture of it. Tabernacle. He likes to spend all of his time. And what's in the tabernacle? What's there? That is the presence of the Lord. So David's favorite thing in the world was not actually being king. David's favorite thing in the world was actually being in the presence of God. That was his favorite thing. And so it kept him in a place where he was following the Lord with all of his heart. And then he was able to be a king and make decisions and judge right, and he didn't stray, and all that stuff didn't happen to him. And the other kings, they are judged by whether or not they were like David. Psalm 84, how lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord, Lord of hosts. I long and yearn for the courts of the Lord. My heart and flesh cry out for the living God. So David's big stamp of his life is, I love being by God. I love being near God. His kingship, his mighty valor, and all of his great victories and how he secured the land of Israel from all their enemies and stuff like that is second, third, fourth, somewhere way down the line compared to the fact that David was a man after God's own heart. He loved the heart of God. He loved being near God. He loved being present with God. So then David becomes the standard. So we are here to, of course, learn about Jesus the King. So let's look at a couple things here. Deuteronomy 17 is where we already looked at that passage. So it just says, the copy of the law is to remain with him, and he's to read it from all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, and observe all the words of his instruction, and to do the statutes. So we've already somewhat explored the idea of Jesus as a king. He's got a kingdom coming and things. So I want to show you then, in this line of teaching that the Bible brings out, we want to see how Jesus lands in it, and we want to grab some things about the committed heart. So in John 5:19, Jesus replies, "Hey, I assure you, the Son is not able to do anything on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever he sees the Father does, the Son does these things in the same way." So he's saying, I only obey the Father. This is Jesus talking. I only obey the Father. So if Jesus is going to be a qualified king, like David, he needs to be all about what Yahweh is about. Okay? So that's John 5. He's got that. Secondly, Philippians 2:8, Jesus humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. For this reason, God highly exalted him. So that's another confirmation. Jesus was obedient. He wanted to hear the voice of Yahweh. He wanted to do what the voice said. And that made him a qualifiably good king. So we're going to look at an extension of that passage here in just a second. Hope that's big enough. That's the beginning. It's the beginning. So what made Jesus different was also this idea of David wanting to be in the courts of the Lord. He was using a lot of flowery language, but he was also just obeying Deuteronomy 6:4, which was just love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. So that was a command that Moses gave to the people. Hey, you know what you should do? You should love God with everything. That's a good idea. I'm going to write it down. Okay, and so this is then Philippians 2:8. We just looked at that. So look at the second paragraph of Philippians 2. For this reason, Jesus' obedience and his love for the Father, for this reason, God exalted him, God highly exalted him, and gave him, Jesus, the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, Jesus is here, every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and those under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So, just like David was all about Yahweh, all about spending time in his courts, all about obeying him and staying tuned into what he was guiding and teaching and directing, and that was what made David such a qualifiably awesome king that all the other kings after him were compared to. Here comes Jesus, and he is obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Okay, he's outside of his death place. It's the night before. And what does he say to the Father? Father, if this cup can pass from me, this cup of suffering, that'd be great, but not my will, but yours be done. And he proved that he was in it for what the Father wanted. And what the Father wanted was he wanted all of us. And Jesus wanted that too. And so when Jesus obeyed to the point of death, God took the most obedient, most in love person with him, and he took him from death, the lowest, the point of shame of all humanity, naked on a cross, and he highly exalted him and gave him the name that when Jesus is spoken, all those Pharisees, all those Sadducees, all those murderers, all those Roman people who just whipped him and stuff like that, at the name of Jesus, they are all going to bow their knee. Those who are in heaven, those who are on earth, and those who are under the earth. So everybody who's gone on to heaven, everybody who's still alive today, and everybody who's passed on, every single person who's ever lived will hear the name of Jesus, and they will at one moment bow their knee to that name. So, well, the story is don't kill Jesus. Okay? He obviously forgave everybody that approached him on it. So, what we have then is Jesus being different. And what I want to grab out of this is, you think about this challenge that everybody had. Remember when we were talking about David? And David completely was devoted to the Lord his God, except for the incident of Uriah the Hittite. Remember that? Okay? Or if you remember the whole story, then you know that's when he actually stole a man's wife and killed a man. Not cool. Okay? Or Solomon. Not perfect. Or Asa, who was completely devoted to the Lord his God, but did not remove the high places. Okay? Or you or me. We know we're not whatever your definition of perfect is, we know we're not there. And so it's actually then the basis of our being completely devoted to the Lord cannot be our own desire to be completely devoted to the Lord. The basis is going to have to be God's complete devotion toward me. Right? If I know that God is completely devoted toward me, then I can be a David who messes up, an Asa who leaves high places, a Solomon who doesn't finish well, a king who doesn't quality completely devoted to the Lord, but then I can change. Because I know that it's not going to be me trying to figure out how to point myself to God. God has already first pointed himself toward me. We love him because he first loved us. He is the one who has initiated. He started all this whole program. He started it. And we're going to have to lean on his initiative and trust that he wants us almost more than we want him. I say almost to give it a little bit of credit. But he wants us more than we want him. Because he's never, ever let up his emotional passion toward us. He's never let it go once. We've all, those who are married, or those who like people, or love people, or you're kind of young and you had a crush. We can ebb and flow. We can kind of come and go. Sometimes we like them when they're likable. Sometimes we don't like them when they're not likable. But God has never deviated his passion and commitment toward us, even a little bit. Never. So we have to then, if we're going to build any kind of relationship with God, if we're going to have any kind of complete devotion toward him, it's going to be based on his complete devotion toward us. We're just going to have to actually look at that complete devotion and receive it and say, wow, why are you so completely devoted toward me? Really? I would have given up on me a long time ago, God. But he comes at us again, and he comes at us again, and he comes at us again. And so when he starts to prove how completely devoted he is toward us, suddenly we find ourselves responding, and we start saying, God, help me be like you. If there's one person who loves well, it's you, and I want to be like that. So we're actually going to start to feed off of his complete focus and devotion toward us. We're going to feed off of it. It's going to then become that driving power that gives us the desire to love him. Oh, I would love anybody who loves me, right? Well, that's God. That's God. We love anybody who loves us? Well, God loves us the most. So then we learn to love him back because of his great love. So let's just kind of do a quick comparison then of the compromised heart and the uncompromised heart, the committed heart. So, the compromised heart, just kind of taking lessons from these early Jewish kings, and even just thinking through my own heart and where I've been, and then maybe you can draw some connection to what I put down here too. But the compromised heart has reasons for why it's not fully devoted. Okay? It's like a Solomon. He had all these wives, and they had all their gods, and so they were bringing their gods, and they're like, Solomon, baby, I've got this awesome deity. Can I get a place to worship him? So instead of having them, wear him down, he says, okay, you can find a little hilltop and put your little altar thingy on it. But don't put it in the temple. Well, a little compromise. But he had a reason, right? He didn't want to be bugged or, wanted to keep peace, or maybe there would be war started with this princess from some other land or something. So he had a reason, right? So we have reasons if we're demonstrating a heart that's not fully devoted. Okay? Well, also, too, when we have a compromised heart, there is a nagging feeling that we're not really listening to God. We kind of have it in our... It's like, with our other relationships, when we know we kind of need to have a talk about something, we can kind of just keep it, kind of push to the outside and talk about other things. We know that. We know it. So it's then, a person has to then kind of look yourself in the face, look yourself in the mirror and say, we got to talk about this. So the same thing with the compromised heart. The compromised heart has a little nagging sensation, like maybe I'm not really fully listening to God then. Or if you remember from the kings, right? There was the first king and then his son started following. We might then find ourselves, if we have a compromised heart, we compare ourselves to those who have an example of compromise. So we say, well, my parents or my people around me or whatever, they do this and this. I don't do that. So I'm doing better. well, if you're comparing yourself to the lowest possible denominator, better than that. That's not the point of being an uncompromised heart. It's like, I don't want to have, mud in my pie. Well, I have less mud in my pie than they do. I don't want any mud in my pie. I don't want pie and mud at all. Okay? The compromised heart has no real fear of being compromised. There's no real fear of being compromised in full devotion to the Lord because it's not that important. Because if it were that important that I have an uncompromised heart, I would be like David. I would be spending my time in the tabernacle. I would be spending my time in the temple. I would be worshiping God. I'd be, pouring through His book. And is there anywhere that I'm missing, anything that's showing a lack of devotion toward you? I would be chasing it. It would be really important to me. And if you think about the story of David, he started out in the woods, out in the forest thingy with the sheep, and he's just loving God. And he never really lost that. And he was scared of losing that. So he remembered back when he was nobody, back when he was the youngest, nobody gave him the time of day. They kind of forgot about him and sent him out with the sheep. But he had Yahweh. And that was all that he needed. And so he didn't want to lose that. And that became the driving force of his committed heart. So the compromised heart isn't really afraid of being compromised. But David's heart was afraid of being compromised. If we were to reread that psalm, you would hear that again, right? It's like, oh Lord, guide me, help me love you, help me be fully devoted to you. He's crying out. Okay? And kind of ultimately the compromised heart really kind of thinks it's doing fine. Maybe doesn't want to talk about it. Okay? So, we'll move on to the next slide. So, but the committed heart, that's that idea that David was scared to lose what he had at the beginning. The committed heart shows, when we talk about the fear of the Lord, I'll put it this way. Fear being far from the Lord and love being near Him. It's probably a good way to put that. When we're talking about the fear of the Lord, fear being far away from God, but love being near Him. And that was David. It scared him that he would be distant from God. And actually one of his psalms, after he did the whole steal a man's wife, kill a man, after he did that, he talks about in his psalm about how he knew that he needed to confess, but he was just kind of playing the side game, and then when he actually confessed, he said it was like fire in his bones. Like it was just rotting him. Like the whole time, it was just agony. And so he loved being near, he feared being far. Okay? And the committed heart goes out of its way to ensure that it's not violating devotion to the Lord. If something's going to inhibit devotion to the Lord, that committed heart wants to go after it. And so as the kings were instructed for the book to remain with him and to read it from all the days of his life so that he learned to fear the Lord as God, the committed heart goes out of its way. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes emotion to discern, to discover, to explore, is there any way that I am not living in devotion to the Lord? And compromise is shown to the committed heart by nearness to God. So just like David, we don't actually have this on record, but I would be safe to say that during that period of time when he was killing the man and taking the man's wife, he probably wasn't going to the temple every day like he was before. He was probably doing other kingy things. Okay? Nearness to God is a great help in understanding where we're really at in our hearts. Okay? So it kind of reminds you of marriage. This idea of a committed heart, this idea that, if I'm fully devoted to someone, I don't have somebody on the side. And that's really what all these other kings were doing. Or Solomon. Solomon had his God, and then he kind of got these other gods on the side. Kind of little extra people. And that's not how God rolls. That's not how God rolls. He is laser focused on every single one of his children. Laser focused. He loves them. He's not thinking about doing other things to take the place of that. Or like, oh, you're not really satisfying me. Something like that. Like God is into us. He's committed to us. He's focused on us. We take that place in his heart. He doesn't find alternatives. So like in a marriage, we have breakdowns in marriage when someone's eyes start to wander and start thinking about others in a way that they're supposed to think about when they put the ring on. Similar? And so just repeating again, God's love is the foundation of our love for Him. So the committed heart doesn't expect actually to hold on to commitment. The devoted heart doesn't expect to hold on to devotion. It knows that the foundation is coming from the outside source. We are leaning on and basking in and soaking in the sunshine of God's devotion toward us. And as His love warms us and we respond to it, we then get the benefit of becoming devoted toward Him. So really the first step is just like we've been talking about, is receive. Just receive. Just you open up your heart, you open up your mind, open up your spirit, and you say, God, can you just love me? Like, really, I don't understand this. It's kind of gooey and weird, but I need it because I'm struggling. Or I'm not fully devoted. Or I'm showing signs of a lack of commitment. And that's the first step. He starts to fill us with Himself. So if we were to read Psalms 51, you can note down if you're making notes. But the committed heart cries to God. This is David after Bathsheba, and I'm just going to read the first few verses. But this one is just awesome. I'll read a few and then we'll pray and we get here. So, Psalms 51:1. Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness. According to the greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you're justified when you speak, blameless when you judge. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. Behold, you desire truth in the innermost being, and in the hidden part you will make me know your wisdom. Purify me with hyssop, I'll be clean. Wash me, I'll be whiter than